Crash through that light of blue, and send the backs around the edge. Fight for every yard. Princeton's on to defend. Rah, 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 rah. Tigers to the ball. The locomotive by the score. And we'll fight with the faith and redemption to win for old Nassau. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20.
Welcome to our Anthropological Theory documentary, centered around the student-athlete experience that collegiate football players have here at Princeton. Through the lens of anthropology, we focus on themes of athletes' bodies, resistance as an athlete, and masculinity in athletics to paint a picture of what the athlete's life is like here. We use anthropological texts and documentaries to bolster the narratives that you will encounter throughout our own documentary. Through our analysis of these readings, we will demonstrate how these concepts directly tie into our interviews with trainers, coaches, and teammates. Collin and I hope you enjoyed this documentary because we sure did have a good time making it.
As athletes, our body plays an instrumental role in our success on the field. While training may look different from sport to sport, athletes are often required to mold their bodies to the highest standards possible. This training, while it often comes with aesthetical benefits, is intended to be functional. In the film Tough Guys, Jackson Katz notes the difference in male body standards for athletic men. He references it in the media, citing the muscular inflation of Batman and Superman in movies from the 1950s versus the 1990s. It is the same concept that we use to think about athletes, particularly football players. Despite the increase of drug testing over the years, athletes are bigger, faster, and stronger than they have ever been. That means that today, we have a generation of naturally built athletes who are building their bodies into the highest form of muscular capacity. We intend to explore the Princeton athletes' relationship to their body through the lens of their own perspective, as well as ones implemented by the team here at Princeton.
We can look to scholar Louis Wacant to teach us a framework of how athletes view their bodies in his ethnography studying boxers in Chicago, titled The Prize Fighter's Three Bodies. He proposes that there are three lenses that athletes view their body through: as a tool, a weapon, or an engine. In all three cases, the Wacant body of the athlete became a disenfranchised part of their person that had to be sculpted to make themselves better boxers. Boxing and football are similar sports in the sense that they are both extremely physically demanding and punishing. We intended to explore if Princeton athletics follows the same approach that Wacant describes. We figured that the best way to start this conversation was by talking to our strength and conditioning coach, Jason Gallucci. He has been at Princeton for years, and it is his job to help athletes here shape their bodies for the purpose of their sport.
Coach, thanks for being with us here today. So let's get right into it. Our first question is, it's your job to help prepare the athletes that you coach to play their sport through developing their bodies. So what is kind of the process that goes into creating a workout plan for yourself, or specifically for the football team? What are the main priorities? Is it strength, speed, body aesthetics, injury prevention, or something else?
A great question, and really, even independent to football, the approach is similar, right? So the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna look at the mechanics of the sport. You're gonna look at the energy systems necessary for the sport or to compete at the sport and function at a very high level. So we'll look at the movement patterns, we'll look at the internal stress that the body's gonna face, and we'll start to program that way. As far as what specific attributes are important, we have a pretty simple approach that covers the process from start to finish. And when you ask what's more important, at the end of the day, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do testing and we're going to evaluate. Right now, some of those tests and some of those evaluations are simple and they're clean, and you know you're being tested. A lot of times we're using simple movement as part of evaluation. So a lot of our main exercises are movement evaluations for us. So we'll get an idea of how you're moving, what you might need help on, where areas where we might have to kind of clean some things up and to be a little bit more technical with. Once we get through testing and evaluation, it's really about work capacity, right? So whatever your sport may be, you think about football, it's repeat effort of 6 to 7 seconds over and over again. Sometimes in clips of 4 to 5 to 6 plays, sometimes up to 12, 14, 15 plays, with a little bit of rest time built in. So we want to build up that work capacity. as a big part of your preparation. Once we get through work capacity, then underlying strength is really our most important thing, right? And as we go through this kind of hierarchy of attributes, what's important to understand is that you can work on any part of these attributes at any point in time during your training. However, if you're not getting the fundamental baseline and meeting a certain standard at the lower levels of that hierarchy, you'll never optimize the ones at the higher level. So again, we go back to testing evaluation. We work on work capacity. If you're fundamentally sound in work capacity, we can work on strength and maximize strength. Once we're able to get that baseline strength, we can really optimize the higher levels of the hierarchy. And see, there's things that you know from training. We'll get into accelerative strength, and we'll get into strength speed and speed strength until we get into more the ballistic power type movements. So our goal really is, again, to test, evaluate, make sure we build capacity, hit that fundamental strength that we know we have to get, and then we'll start working on the more power movements and the movements that are going to really transfer onto the field more. But again, if we don't build the base of the pyramid, you say if you want to build a big house, you have to have a big foundation, dig that foundation deep. It's important for us to build from the bottom up. And again, you can work at any part of that pyramid or that hierarchy, and we do. As you know, we're never solely focused just on strength or just on power. We're trying to work all those attributes at certain points in time, but we do have to make sure that we meet those bench line marks.
And kind of you alluded to it, but how specialized does it get? Because when obviously in a sport like football, there are different positions, different players, different body types kind of that you're working with, and also different goals that they want to reach. How does it kind of break down if guys are, maybe if they're starting at baseline, or certain guys move up past that baseline much faster than others? How does it kind of get specialized as you look in from a positional standpoint or a body type standpoint, or even a potential standpoint?
Yeah, it's a great question. And obviously, different positions have different tasks and different things we have to do. We look at a quarterback, that's a rotational sport athlete, right? More so than a defensive lineman's going to be, a defensive back's going to be. So we'll do more training with them from a rotational perspective, but also a lot of kind of unilateral training. If you've noticed in training, those guys tend to do a lot more single leg work, a lot more single arm work, to try to build up that rotational force capabilities, or even anti-rotational capabilities. Even within a position group, it's different, right? So some guys, again, they might have a good work capacity and really good strength, foundational strength. However, if they need to change their body type and let's say gain weight, their work capacity and strength training are going to be much more beneficial to them than getting into the more ballistic power type work from a weight gain perspective and building lean muscle mass. So even if someone's kind of graduated through kind of work capacity and strength, if changing their body is the most important thing to them going out and be able to perform at a high level, they'll still remain in that kind of strength and hypertrophy phase. For those guys that their body composition is where it needs to be, and their body mass is where it needs to be, and they're kind of more at that ideal weight, then we will progress them through into more power movements and change the program a little bit that way.
Perfect, thanks. So that kind of brings us nicely into our second question, which is kind of like we talked about body compositions. So as a coach, do you ever think about the aesthetics of the athlete's body, or is your focus solely on functionality and performance? How do you approach situations where the goals of the team or yourself as a coach kind of conflict with what the guys would want, which you kind of alluded to already, like guys having to gain or lose weight, or guys that ego lift and kind of tend to want to lift beyond what might be safe or functional for the sport, and kind of how do athletes respond to these structures that they may not want to fit into?
Yeah, so definitely more functional performance based, right, than aesthetically, and with someone also kind of understanding the big picture, right? You can never perform at a high level if everything's not working right. You know what I'm saying? So if there are some aesthetic changes an athlete wants to make, it's certainly a conversation we're going to have. Now, again, I believe everyone has an ideal body weight, which is fluid, right? That's a moving target. That changes as you develop as an athlete. But everyone has an ideal body weight that's going to allow them to perform at the highest level. As far as training, as for the aesthetics and kind of doing more of the ego lifts, that's part of what we do. And I think in a way, when we talk about work capacity, those exercises kind of feed into work capacity. So while it's not something that's in our menu and something that we're going to program more often than not, we know that they're a great way to build work capacity. So you kind of mentioned injury prevention earlier on and making sure that they're not doing something detrimental. That's really the most important thing, right? So if it gets to a point where they're going to overtrain and that work capacity is too extreme, and we know that we could lead into some issues where they're going to develop problems because of just high volume of work. So we want to have the conversation from that perspective. We want to try to find out what exactly the changes they're trying to make, and we would kind of dive a little bit deeper into that, right? And we mentioned body composition and some of those other things that we can talk about, and making sure that we're doing that the right way, which is when honestly I start to lean on the experts in nutrition and even sports psychology in some aspects to make sure we're doing things right.
You kind of alluded to the nutrition side of it. How do you guys approach as strength coaches? I know you work closely with nutritionists and maybe people who have like a direct expertise in that field, but obviously you guys know a lot as well. So like, how do you approach fueling the bodies like of the athletes?
Yeah, great question. And yes, there's a lot of what we can do based on our knowledge base and the things that we're doing. And it's really education, right? Well, it's education and we are providing, but we want to make sure that we're providing the right type of food and fuel at the right times, and as well as educating us of why are we fueling this way, so that when we're not there or we don't have the opportunity to provide for you, that you're making the right choices on your own. Even a lot of that in the simple and the basics we rely on our dietitians for. It just tends to have a lot more background. They are the experts in the field. They're a lot more of a backbone with them being the experts in the field. And there's a lot of information out there for sure, and the waters get really muddy when it comes to nutrition, and you can go back on a lot of the debates that have been going on over the last 10-15 years about what's really good to take in and what's healthy for you. So really relying on them for even in the really simple and basic things to say, hey, we're looking to provide, whether it's pre-exercise nutrition or during exercise nutrition, post-exercise nutrition, what are our best options, and how do we do that the right way?
Third question, which is about how do team dynamics influence the way players approach their bodies and workouts? Do athletes tend to follow each other's habits, or is individuality more common, do you think?
I mean, team dynamics influence a lot of what you do in every area of your experience here at Princeton, whether it's athletically, academically, socially, whatever the case may be. You spend so much time with each other that those dynamics and the culture of the team certainly have influence, which is why we talk about culture all the time and how important culture is to us. So without a doubt, it definitely plays a role. And I get back to the education and explaining why we're doing things the way we're doing, why we're doing them the way we're doing them. The importance of, again, kind of finding that ideal body weight, that ideal body composition, and playing at that, because it's going to ultimately help you perform, and that's our ultimate goal, right? And we are very goal oriented, as you know, and coach is really good about kind of stating those, so that it's a team approach, and we're all going the same way, and that everything we do ultimately is about reaching those goals, right? And trying to eliminate any of the distractions or anything that's not going to push us in that direction. There are certainly dynamics that come into play when it comes to body type, body composition, and I kind of want to step back and say that we discourage our guys from, if they do body composition evaluation, from sharing their numbers, and sharing that type of information, because a lot of that gets skewed, right? And a lot of that is very specific to you and your genetics, and even if we were both 6'4", 270 pounds, we're just going to be different bodies, so comparing your numbers to my numbers is not fair. And even comparing your numbers to numbers that you hear across the country and other athletes and what you might see. So we really kind of discourage the sharing of that information. It's kind of natural that it would, but as long as it's healthy, right, and that we're not using that to drive athletes in a certain direction. We absolutely discourage coaches from having that information and using that information, to tell an athlete, like, hey, you need to gain weight or you need to lose weight based on this, because a lot of that information is pretty scientific, and it should be handled by the experts, which is why our dietitians handle those conversations.
Lastly, what changes do you notice in athletes' relationships with their bodies over their time at Princeton? Because obviously you guys, us from when we come in as before freshmen all the way up through now, where Nasir and I are graduated seniors kind of on the back end of it. Do you think they tend to be more functional in their thinking, or do these aesthetic concerns kind of persist? Like do you see the relationship with their body change over time because you do them for a long time?
It probably depends on where they are in the depth chart, honestly. And I say that jokingly, but it gets to a point to where, if you're out there and you're competing, by the time you're a senior, what you have to do to get your body feeling the best it possibly can to go out and compete. And if that's fueling a certain way, if that's carrying a certain amount of weight or losing a certain amount of weight, making sure you're hydrating the right way, what it takes to go out there and compete in the physical sport. And at that point in time, it gets, you're out there and you've sacrificed as much as you sacrificed getting into your senior year or whenever it might be that you get on the field, that those small sacrifices of fueling a certain way or carrying a certain body mass is something you would easily do to go out and perform on a Saturday or a Friday night if that's the case. You do tend to see guys as they get towards the end of their career, right? If maybe they're not getting the playing time that they want, where they start to think about life after football, and that's natural because the sport that we're involved with, body size is a critical part of what we do. A bigger body is harder to move than a smaller body. Guys tend to carry more weight than what they're going to carry throughout the rest of their life. So as they start to get kind of near retirement, you see guys start to change, and I actually think that's healthy, right? Because you start to set yourself up for your time post 22, post Princeton, and how you're going to kind of carry body weight and what you're going to be like for the rest of your life. And some of what we do and some of what we ask, because it's the nature of the sport, is unnatural. And you've had teammates, you've seen people, you yourself, and you put on a fair amount of weight throughout your 4 years here. And that takes a toll on your joints, takes a toll on your heart, it takes a toll on a lot of things, and it's okay for when you're young, and it's okay even if you were to carry this on into a professional career after Princeton, but it's not something you want to carry into your late 30s, 40s, and 50s, and it's good that guys kind of make those changes right away.
Good. Thank you, Coach. We appreciate your time. Thank you for everything you do.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Our interview with Coach Gallucci offers an informative glimpse into the detailed process of building an athlete's body, one that aligns quite closely with the Quant's framework and the prize fighter's 3 bodies. Coach Gallucci described how strength training begins with foundational assessments, which in our case is testing movement patterns, evaluating stamina, and building underlying strength. What Quant teaches us that, quote, physical preparedness, in turn, is constructed as a reliable, empirical indicator of moral commitment and mental resolve, end quote. Coach's methodical approach, one where we rise through different levels of functional lifting, give us the best chance to meet these standards that Quant describes.
The foundations of Gallucci's structure relate to Kant's idea of viewing the body as an engine to be honed for maximum efficiency and durability. As Kant writes, that the body constantly needs to be tuned up and taken care of in the proper way, its parts checked, tried, and replaced on time, its filters cleaned, its fuel tank replenished so that it is kept in perfect running order. Just as Kant's boxers sculpt their bodies to withstand the demands of their sport, Princeton athletes undergo rigorous, specialized programs tailored to their positions and individual needs. For instance, quarterbacks focus on rotational movements for throwing, while linemen require plans emphasizing size and power. Yet Coach Gallucci's approach differs from Kant's analysis in its emphasis on holistic development and long-term health. While Kant highlights the often exploitative nature of training in boxing, where the body is reduced to a means to an end, Gallucci prioritizes sustainability and injury prevention. His focus on building a strong foundation through movement evaluations and functional strength suggests a view of the athlete's body as not just a tool or weapon, but as something to be preserved and cared for. As he put it himself, you can never perform at a high level if everything is not working the right way. We can see this in action when he is okay with athletes losing weight during the season as they get close to retirement in their senior year. This approach contrasts with the punishing routines described in Kant's ethnography, where boxers frequently push their bodies to the brink, often at the expense of their well-being.
Well, in a sport like football, the gaining of muscle mass does have a basis in scientific reasoning and safety. The act of transforming one's body quickly transcends beyond its basic purpose. That is why we'll explore how our teammates are reacting to the structure that Coach Gallucci makes and check in with their own relationships with their body.
Football is really a violent sport, and at least speaking from my perspective, I play middle linebacker, so I'm in the middle of a lot of like the contact. People are coming to hit me, I'm hitting people every play, and if my body's not strong enough, then it's going to get too worn down and not be able to handle all of that.
Yeah, so lifting is a very important part of being a great football player from multiple different aspects. Obviously, there's linemen or the bigger guys that play up front where everything that they do is about brute strength. So lifting is going to be really important for them, but it's also really important for the DBs because even though we have to guard guys and stay agile, stay light, we still have to come up and make tackles and help those guys when runners or receivers get to the second level.
Responses to this question were fairly similar across the board. All three responses acknowledged the differences in football's position-specific need in lifting, as we discussed with Coach Gallucci. This was particularly interesting in Josh's response, where he emphasized that it was still important for his position of defensive back. Lifting was still important for his position of defensive back, despite being one of the positions that requires less physical size than others. It also seemed that Will, a fellow scholar of anthropology, had already had Waquant in his mind when answering the questions, as he described lifting as creating armor for his body. Waquant learned a similar sentiment from one of his boxing interlocutors. Because Will is an offensive lineman, his job on the football field is to protect others, so it's unsurprising for him to have resonated with this perspective that views his body with that purpose.
Riker, a freshman and someone new to the Princeton football experience, already embodies Waquant's thinking about the athlete's body being a tool that needs to be sharpened and maintained, which he finds comes through lifting rather than technical football technique. This prioritization also came from the desire to now get worn down from the physicality of football, which Waquant references as a motivation for the boxers as they try to avoid father time for as long as they can.
I think like lifting for me, especially when I had to start gaining a bunch of weight, I knew I had to gain weight, and I was thinking if I gain weight, I want to be, super strong and super muscular. The weight I gain, I don't want it to be just all fat. So I think on my own time, I decided to do a lot more things that were more almost lifting like a bodybuilder rather than like a football player. I was trying to focus more on doing arms and my shoulders and trying to put on a lot of muscle and look good.
I definitely feel the need that there's always more to be done than what's asked and required. I always feel that me personally, I want to do and I want to strive for setting the bar higher than what's required. So I always feel the need to go above and beyond, again, the workouts that are required or asked for.
Here, we see what Waquant describes as, quote, the relentless obligation of corporeal care, end quote. These players, and many others, have such a dedication to their body goals that they are willing to go outside the football structure to ensure they're giving their body the maximum workload it can handle. However, Waquant also reminds us that this can be paired with, quote, the biting anxiety over decay and dereliction, end quote, which shows itself here as well. While players are fully committed to making the strength gains, fears of getting fat because of weight gain are continuously mollified by the incessant workouts.
Lifting makes me feel like just empowered to do anything. I feel like the ability to push through hard things when you're going through adversity and just straining through is like a feeling that I can't get anywhere else. The weight room is kind of my home away from home. No matter what's going on throughout the day or what family issues I have, social issues, football issues, I know the weight room, it all goes away. I really just am with myself and the weight, and it's kind of a relationship that's paid off for me. It got me to Princeton, in my opinion. Without the weight room, I would not be here. and I've learned a lot of lessons from the weight room. And
in that day. And then beyond that, I think it's just a great practice for your physical and mental health. And also, I think when you lift and you work out, you see yourself in the mirror and you feel good about yourself, you look good, and it's kind of like a boost for your overall morale that kind of makes you a more positive human being.
Through these interviews, we see how integral lifting is not only for the sport of football itself, but also to players' lives. Lifting is seen as an escape for some players, and they enjoy being in the weight room. They feel a natural high when they push their bodies to the limits and feed off the immediate results they see when they look at themselves in the mirror. Lifting serves as a crucial part of an athlete's experience, and it hones the body into a better working engine.
So when I came into Princeton, I had to gain about 30 pounds. I came in at 275, and now I'm about 305, and that's what I've played at ever since. For me, that was a matter of being able to be successful in the field. Like the coaches just didn't feel able to put me out there if I wasn't up to that certain weight, just as a matter of, being able to move other people and being safe myself. You can kind of be a liability if you're out there and you don't weigh enough, end up on the ground, stuff like that. And then, from a personal performance standpoint, you have to weigh that much in order to move people, like I said, and it's definitely a lot easier at a heavier weight to move the other big humans around that you face on a daily basis. So
I think weight gaining here for me was different because I came in as outside linebacker. And then whenever I changed positions, I changed really early on, my first day here. So I think it was just different because when I changed positions, obviously I knew I was going to be in a different role where I had to be heavier and a lot stronger. So I wasn't used to that, and I'm just younger. And then just talking with Coach Verbit and then the strength coaches, and then also myself and my teammates, I kind of felt the not pressure, but it was almost encouraging me to, if I want to succeed in this position, I'm going to need to gain weight.
As Coach Gallucci referenced, these are not minor changes, but one that takes significant tolls on the body over time. The undertaking of gaining 30 pounds in a year is no joke and an impressive feat. All the players interviewed touched on the influence that the coaches had on their weight transformation. Whether this comes in the form of pressure to conform to the physical standard of what is expected at their positions, or using it as a way to become more physically dominant on the field, the ideas about these athletes' bodies are enforced and ingrained not only in how we are trained, but how we are taught to think about the purpose of our bodies. Tommy spoke about how the weight was needed for him to use his body to physically dominate others, similar to Waquan's thinking about the body as a weapon, where athletes are the modern-day gladiators who use their bodies to dominate others in fights.
Yeah, no. One of the first questions that I always get asked when I meet someone is, do you play football? Because it's pretty evident being 300 pounds. It can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing, but it's all really about your attitude. When I was younger, I was definitely a fat kid, and if it was easy to fall victim to being self-conscious, but I've learned just over the years, you just gotta kind of a positive attitude about it. And the good thing about being big is it gives you undivided attention when you walk into a room, so it's really what you make of it.
Yeah, definitely a number of stories. I've been in classes where classmates have asked me if I play football just by looking at me. I wasn't wearing any football gear or anything. In the computer science department, which is, there's a couple football players in it and a couple athletes, but you definitely get singled out in that department. I've also had a number of teachers, when something needs to be grabbed or reach something up high, they have to ask me, and other athletes like me, so definitely.
Yeah, almost every single day, all the time, just because I'm 6'5", 300 pounds. So whenever I walk in a room, everybody looks at me, and I don't even have to be wearing football stuff, and people are like, oh, do you play a sport?
The look test is a common phenomenon in football, where there are certain physical standards that players of certain positions are expected to fit into. These include height and weight, but also how your body looks. The point is, you have to fit into these categories to even have your talent for the sport evaluated. In Waquan's piece, he encountered a referee who claimed that you could determine 75% of boxing matches just based off of the physical makeup of the competitors. However, it is important to remember that our bodies are not only seen by those in the athletic world. We are a backup campus in classroom and social settings our body become the object of perception of others as well. As we heard from our teammates, this usually stems from the fact that we tend to stand out. As they told us, people would ask them if they were athletes while not wearing any team gear, identifying them off of their bodies alone. Brian in particular offered both the positive and negative effects that this can have on an athlete.
Our conversations with Coach Gallucci and our teammates revealed the deep connection between LeCompte's framework and the reality of being an athlete at Princeton. What stood out the most was how the process of molding our bodies becomes a journey of personal growth, with athletes constantly negotiating between what their sport demands and what they personally want. We saw that most of our teammates were willing and eager to make the sacrifices for the betterment of the team, even when it meant changing their bodies. Through these interviews, we want to highlight how the Princeton athlete's body is more than a physical form, but instead a site of transformation, sacrifice, and pride. An athlete's body carries the stories of complex journeys, both individual and shared. And this exploration has shown us that the body is not only a tool for success, but a reflection of the unique experiences of being an athlete. Our next section will focus on resistance as an athlete. As college athletes, our lives at Princeton are very structured. We have an app called Teamworks that dictates our movements throughout campus down to the very minute in some cases. While the structure of football in our lives helps us stay on task and avoids distractions, it can feel very constricting. You may ask, how do athletes push against the structure that is meant to constrain our experience at Princeton? James C. Scott's work, Weapons of the Weak, Everyday Forms of Peasant Resistance, can provide us with a framework to think about how athletes push back against the structure in our day-to-day lives. Scott looks at how the peasant class resisted in subtle and not so subtle ways. These everyday forms of resistance demonstrate, quote, most subordinate classes throughout most of history have rarely been afforded the luxury of open, organized political activity, end quote, as Scott put it. We see a through line between Scott's concept of everyday resistance and how players on the Princeton football team partake in their own acts of resistance.
Starting with an example of the subtle form of resistance is the questionnaires that we fill out every day. Every morning, as soon as we wake up, it's expected the first thing we do is answer 7 questions on an app. And our responses are sent to our coaches, strength staff, and medical staff. These questions, which are the same every day, include how much sleep did you get? What was the quality of your sleep? What do you rate your soreness? What do you rate your stress? How fatigued are you? How is your mood? And how motivated are you to train and compete? We are able to answer each question on a scale of 1 to 10, with the goal of helping our coaches track data about how we are doing in response to the demands of football so our workloads can be adjusted when needed. However, our teammates found that this is not likely to be the case. They did not believe that the data was being properly used. We asked our teammates their approach to filling out these questionnaires in light of this.
I don't always fill it out truthfully, especially the part where it's how ready are you to compete today, and I don't answer that truthfully most of the time because I feel like if you put what you really feel, if you're really not feeling it that day, you're down, something happened in your personal life. I feel like I can't let the coaches know that I'm not ready to perform because every day is a grind and you got to fight as hard as you can to get out of the field, and you always have to bring the energy and bring the juice.
Yeah, I always fill it out, mostly truthfully during the weekdays, but sometimes on the weekend, Saturday, if I was out till 2 or 3 a.m. and I woke up at 11, then I might say, okay, I went to bed at midnight, woke up at 8 a.m. The hours of sleep I usually am truthful, but the time, sometimes I gotta give a little leeway so it doesn't look like I was up till 4 a.m. going crazy until and then waking up at 1 p.m.
Yeah, I fill out the questionnaire every day because I think it gives good information to the coaches. I think sometimes I don't fill it out truthfully, and I guess the reason I don't fill it out truthfully sometimes is I don't want to tell the coaches if I'm super tired or didn't get enough sleep, just because I want the coaches to think that I'm doing the right thing all the time.
Players fill out questionnaires and are not truthful in certain parts to give the illusion that they're in compliance with the standards of what it takes to be a Division I athlete, getting good rest, eating the right foods, etc. As one player put it, I need to lie about doing the right things every time. This ties directly to Scott's notion of the impression of compliance. Scott writes, quote, "What is conveyed is the impression of compliance without its substance. But the symbolic order is not directly challenged. Indeed, it is confirmed by the appearance of it." End quote. Therefore, these athletes are masking true compliance, emotions, or even dissatisfaction by answering 10s when they really want to put a 1 or 2.
Thinking about how some players might exaggerate their soreness on the health questionnaires or make sarcastic comments about practice conditions is similar to Razak's gripes in Scott's work. It's their way of expressing frustration or dissatisfaction without openly confronting the coaches or administrating system. Like Razak's gaming the system of getting handouts before he's supposed to by directly asking people, these small acts let athletes push back against their intense structures and expectations of sports without risking major consequences like losing playing time, while conversely, Razak actually does damage his reputation. We will now shift out and discuss an aspect of the athletic experience that we believe provides the most interesting dichotomy of resistance: injuries. While the typical athletic structure in our lives is designed to keep us healthy and playing, injuries divert us from this path. Thinking about athletes experiencing injuries, we interviewed George O'Neill, an athletic trainer for the football team, to learn how athletes fight to stay on the field when injured, or in some cases, find ways to stay off the field when they do not want to play. Both are forms of resistance that deviates from the athletic structure at the center of our experience at Princeton.
So George, appreciate you being here with us today. So our first question, kind of introduced it already, is do you find that some athletes will fake injuries or prolong their recovery as a way to not practice or play in games? How do you, as an athletic trainer, respond to a situation like that?
I wouldn't say necessarily fake. I think sometimes you have people that, there's different levels of comfort that they have, going back and stuff like that. So a lot of times as an athletic trainer, you fall back on what are the parameters of safety for a particular injury, head injury, ankle injury, and stuff like that. And you're sort of always evaluating those parameters to see, okay, can this athlete safely get back in it? If they can, then you're trying to push them to their comfort level. And very rare does it happen, but you do get sometimes some pushback where man, I just don't feel comfortable and stuff like that. And you're really, you have to honor that. I would say back in the old day, you might try to push someone a little bit harder. There were things, like punishment runs that, coaches would do and stuff like that. So all that has really taken a backseat to really kind of just focusing on okay, I'm a professional, I know what my parameters are and stuff like that, and kind of working with that student athlete, kind of reassuring them that, hey, listen, you're definitely safe with what we're doing and stuff like that, and so we can proceed, and just trying to take out any of those kind of insecurities that they might have. And then if it's something more personal, then kind of obviously we have that confidentiality in the medical world that we can kind of talk to a student athlete and say, listen, what's going on? Let's work this out. And then we in respect to confidentiality, we just tell the coach, he's not up to that level, or we never say oh, this kid just doesn't want to practice. Yeah. It's just because I think especially at a place like Princeton, we're what's called the medical model. So we don't work for athletics, we work for health services. So it really gives us that medical clout to make independent decisions, and I think that's what we've always based our stuff on. We've done that. We've been part of health services probably since I think the mid '60s, and now you're starting to see in the country a lot more people go into that medical model.
So as you kind of alluded to, you guys are on the medical side of it. You're not directly from the athletic department. So do you ever get any pushback from the athletic side, either from coaches or guys who maybe are trying to rush guys back who don't feel like they're ready, or is there any disconnect there?
I think being football players, one of the great things, our relationship with Coach Ray is I have a meeting with Coach every single day. We go into practice. So he's actually gone the opposite, kind of be more conservative. We have had coaches here where they try to push that envelope. They might kind of, hey, are you really, good to are you really hurt, And so we have to be really strong on that and to say, listen, no, this is coming from me. Yeah. This is not coming from the kid, right? I'm making this medical decision that he can't go. And, one of the great things being a part of the medical model, that's where we have that clout. Dr. Steinlight, our director of athletics, is going to back us 100% on that. So I think it's those instances where you have to really just understand that, there's different motivations why coaches would do that and stuff like that. But ultimately, we're in charge of the safety of that athlete, and we're never going to put anything to jeopardize that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Scott's idea of resistance without confrontation is another useful way to look at how athletes, trainers, and coaches interact. Scott talks about how people who don't have a lot of power, like peasants in his examples, find ways to push back against authority without openly challenging it or directly voicing dismay to higher-ups. Scott writes, quote, "The lower classes typically avoid any direct symbolic confrontation with authority or with elite norms," end quote. It's all about protecting themselves without rocking the boat too much. This connects perfectly to what George said about managing player well-being while dealing with coaches. When the trainers say, "This is coming from me, this is not coming from the kid," they're taking the pressure off the athlete and framing the decision as their own. It's a way of shielding the player while also avoiding direct conflict with the coach. The trainer is also resisting the coach's expectations, but in a way that doesn't openly challenge their authority.
So on the other hand, we know that some athletes often go to great lengths to keep themselves on the field in the case of injury. So I mean, like stories you can tell us about how athletes kind of try to get away with this, or like kind of how you have to approach that, or if you know that someone's really fighting through something that might be dangerous to them.
A lot of times, like you see an athlete, I think limping is a great one. Like we never want to see an athlete limping, on the field and stuff like that. That's why when we're returning you to activity, we're going to put you through a whole battery of functional tests. And a lot of times, there's a couple exercises I call like the true sermon. Like for an ankle, it's like you have to be able to kind of hop on that leg normally. And if you can't do that, then we're not going to let you. Because if you try to go out there and you're limping around, one, you're probably doing more harm to the injury, but it just doesn't look good. The optic doesn't look good. So we're really aware of that. And the same thing, dealing with concussions. I've been here for 36 years, so it's changed a lot. Whereas, before it might be, hey, if you're symptomatic for 2 days and that's how many days you're going to be out, but now we have all of this testing. And that's why I think, we take it kind of really serious in the sense that we need the honesty from the student athlete, but we're also observing a lot of different things. The neuropsych testing, you as functioning, returning back to play for function, because we're always we're looking for signs where, maybe there's not, truth being told, or go back to like an ankle injury or something like that, whereas like it's really hurting him. They're trying to play, but every once in a while we see a sign like a grimace or like. Maybe like in play, they're always kind of grabbing it and stuff like that, so we're always checking. That happens in game, time a lot, we might kind of clear someone for an injury or a concussion, but we're always watching that next series. That's why how we built it into the program we do is that, like Dave is the defensive guy, right? So as you guys come off the field, he's going up and down that bench, kind of asking you how you all feel, just so we're always kind of having a checks and balance and stuff like that to make sure we're flat. Because one, symptoms always change, right? So you got to be aware of that, and two, you want to kind of be able to observe that. Now you're kind of off. Are they doing something funny or something like that? Are they kind of like holding their neck? So really, it's a lot of observation and kind of making sure we're checking in with the student athlete.
Athletes fighting to play through injury is an interesting form of resistance in itself. They're resisting what their bodies are telling them and what we were taught within the structure of Princeton athletics. If you're hurt, you do not play. We are willing to do this despite the tremendous risk that it puts us under. While many times the trainers see the signs and stop athletes from taking these risks, athletes will still fight hard to hide them at all costs. In Tough Guys, Katz describes that men use risky behavior as a way of proving their toughness. That is certainly true in this context, but I believe it also highlights how much they want to keep playing. They're resisting factors that keep them away from the structure of football in order to keep doing what they love.
Looking at this serves as a reminder that even in highly structured environments, people find creative ways to push back. These subtle acts of resistance might seem small, but they can be powerful ways to navigate the pressure and maintain some control over their own experiences.
Sports have long been an industry intertwined with masculinity due to their physical and competitive nature. Many athletes will often say that sports, particularly football, have taught them how to be men. How do we learn to be men through athletics? In order to answer this question, we started by reflecting on our own early influences with manhood in football. We will also be using Farah Ghanem's piece To Live and Die Like a Man to draw connections to situations where external factors are shaping masculinity, as well as the documentary Tough Guys to provide the common framework for thinking about violence and manhood. For me, my high school football experience heavily shaped my perception of what it meant to be a man. For reference, I went to an all-boys Catholic middle school and high school. Athletics at my school were taken very seriously, but they were also used intentionally as a teaching tool for the kind of men that the school wanted us to be. They emphasized to us that the football team should be like a family, and a family that comprised solely of 15 males is certainly an interesting dynamic. Despite the hyper-masculine optics, my school tried to emphasize the understanding of positive masculinity and that men should act with compassion, humility, trust, and zeal, attributes that Katz teaches us are necessary in a new age of vulnerable men. My largest influences during this time were two of my football coaches. Although they were not related to me, they took on the role of father figures for me, similar to Ahmed in To Live and Die Like a Man, where he learned to be a man through his environment and family beyond his father. My coaches taught me to be disciplined and sincere in everything that I do through football.
Ever since I was a kid playing Little League football, there was always an emphasis on being tough. In my early days of playing football, my dad was my head coach. He would put me in situations to be tougher than my peers, throwing me in drills with kids that were twice my size or a year or two older than me. All of this was to help me be a better football player, but it also emphasized the idea of being a man in general. Throughout my football career, the emphasis on masculinity and football have always been intertwined. While we both share this connection between football and manhood, Ghana reminds us that, quote, a masculine identification is not fixed, complete, or fully established, but has to be recreated and reasserted in different settings, end quote. Therefore, we are seeking to determine how being athletes changes our relationship with being men on the Princeton campus.
In Tough Guys, Katz argues that in sports, you gain respect by disrespecting another man, which he characterizes through the game of basketball, where one person dunks on the other and embarrasses them by rubbing it in their face. At Princeton, we are taught restraint. Our head coach, Coach Bob Serace, emphasizes that trash-talking our opponents should not be a part of our team. Two of his most used quotes are, "Don't give your power away," and "Celebrate with your teammates."
Our coach imparts onto us that we gain power as men by not letting our emotions get the best of us, similar to Ahmed's mother teaching him to control his emotions and not cry. When we stoop down to the level of trash-talking an opponent, we lose this power as a man. He tells us to celebrate with our teammates to reinforce the brotherhood and positive masculinity of football rather than to make it an opportunity to belittle others. This message is taken mostly to heart by our players. Despite the ups and downs of football, our team stays poised and respectful. We are not a team who commits unnecessary penalties, where players act aggressively outside the parameters of the game. However, we regain our edge that Katz would love to critique in the violent approach that we are taught to bring to our play on the field. Violence and aggression is not only needed when playing the sport of football, it's cultivated and idolized in many ways on our team. Guys who demonstrate violence and aggression on the field tend to be rewarded with slaps on the helmet after big hits or a great highlight reel they can post on social media showing how they impose their will on another grown man.
In copious amounts of drills we do, I've heard coaches yell, "Be more violent," or "shock and shed" to the guy in front of me. The language they use is very reminiscent of the coach that Katz points out in the movie Varsity Blues, which is meant to be a caricature of a hyper-masculine football coach. Interestingly enough, this over-the-top portrayal is quite realistic to how our coaches choose to motivate us.
Before games, coaches will motivate us by talking about how we have to take the souls of our opponents and draw a line in the dirt and dare the other team to cross it. Oftentimes, we describe our games as a brawl or a heavyweight boxing match. Our coaches see these hyperbolic examples as valuable lessons, and we in turn internalize them. In To Live and Die Like a Man, Ahmed's family saw important lessons for men in violence. They thought that being in a violent altercation would build discipline, so they condoned him fighting back against bullies.
Because football is deeply intertwined with our identities as men, and is a competitive sport that hinges on victory and failure, our identities are constantly being tested at Princeton. Every time we step on the football field, you either succeed or you fail. Succeeding builds up our sense of perceptions of manhood and being a man on our team. Ghanem reminds us that it is not always an individual experience, when she writes that masculinity is, quote, always under the gaze of others, who may challenge, reaffirm, legitimize, or discredit its durability and authenticity, end quote. Thus, we fight to keep our masculine identities by proving to others that are constantly observing our performance, such as coaches, teammates, and fans.
Making a good play on the field is like the biggest like pat in the back you could ever receive. You know, you spend so much time doing preparation that when you execute, it's just like, it's kind of like an adrenaline high. You know, you want to keep doing it. It makes everything worth it in a way. You know, you definitely feel like a big ego boost. You feel like, you know, you're the man. Like, I'm imposing my will against another man from point A to point B against his will. Specifically at offensive line, it's a very gritty position in the trenches, and it takes a special type of person to succeed and thrive in the trenches. So making a play at offensive line is probably the best feeling ever.
You know, I usually feel pretty good when I make a good play, but I know that it's expected. You know, we go through it all week in practice, and as much as I feel good, it's kind of routine at that point.
It feels like all eyes are on you, but you just feel good about yourself. Obviously, you're trying to put on for your teammates, your brothers that you kind of practice with every day. It's not only just about like the crowd, it's also about like representing Princeton, it's about representing your brothers next to you.
So when you don't make a good play and it shows up on film, obviously film doesn't lie, and it really exposes like your, you know, your flaws.
When I don't make a good play and we got to watch it in film, it's pretty frustrating knowing that I'm capable of doing it. I've done it multiple times throughout the week or throughout my career, and watching it in film, it's just very frustrating to see.
It's embarrassing. You feel like you're letting your teammates down, and then obviously there's that comical part where the coach is kind of going to oust you and call you out. So
Scott's response particularly highlights the violent characteristics that come along with this identity. He takes pride in his abilities to physically dominate others. Instead of violence being a compensation for lacking physical size and strength, like Katz describes in Tough Guys, for some football players, it is the reward of putting in all the work and the ultimate proof of our masculine identities. Kyler also expresses this joy when he says he feels like the man when he makes a play. Blaine spoke about how much preparation goes into making good play, but also how it's expected of us. I believe this further goes to show how dedicated we are to maintaining our identities, to be the best we can, and the pressure that we put on ourselves to do so at all time.
Unsurprisingly, our teammates were less eager to share how they felt when they were embarrassed. They referenced that they are representing their teammates and brothers and how it is frustrating to let people down. They also talked about how they just have to keep pushing forward and trying to improve, which reminded me of Ahmed when he would be berated for not getting the right bread by his mother, and he would immediately have to go back out despite having his ego hurt. As football players, we have internalized this lesson and seek to continuously improve ourselves as athletes. These ideas are on display when you watch a big play you made in film or make a big stop on game day in front of fans and family. When you fail or mess up, that sense of manhood comes into question. All in all, these examples allude to how maintaining a masculine image and identity is at the forefront of an athlete's mind. There is no way to separate our experience at Princeton from it. The mosaic of athletes' lives that we've witnessed shows that our experiences at Princeton as football players is far more complex than the game on the field. The unique dynamics involved in our time as student athletes have not only been formative for our collegiate experiences, but also will shape our perspectives for years to come. There is much to be taken away from navigating a world of masculinity, violence, body shaping, and an intense structure, all while attending one of the top academic institutions in the country. Thank you for going on this journey with us as we look to find answers beyond the game.